Okay. What is the main Confederate strategy? What is the main Confederate strategy? Since King Cotton diplomacy failed? Yeah. Hold out, because they don't need to win a big victory. Make the war so horrible that the United States will politically not want to fight. By the way, that's going to be the strategy in a lot of wars. That was the exact strategy Japan would try for all of World War II. Make the war so horrible that the United States will sue for peace. It's a strategy. So back to this. And who was Union commander of the Army of the Potomac? The main Union commander? George McClellan, very cautious. Who is the very good Confederate commander? Davis was their president. Johnson, yeah. Did we mention who won this battle, or just kind of mention it in the questions? Okay, so you notice they have the balloon. Even though it was so windy, the balloon didn't come out. So the Confederates counterattacked. It was right at the gates of Richmond. So even though McClellan blew opportunity after opportunity, if he would have pushed through the peninsula, they might have got out in the open well before the Confederates had time to dig in. McClellan didn't have enough men to surround Richmond, and that left a flank open where Johnston counterattacked. The problem was no one had used armies this big before. Men got lost. Commanders weren't used to organizing large units. And there are some parts where this goes short, where they literally were 10 feet apart, blazing away at each other. At the end of the day, it failed. There's no clear victor, but Johnston's counterattack failed. But in just a few hours, to give you an idea how bloody this battle was, almost 12,000 men went down, killed, wounded, or missing. That's a 6,000 or over 6,000 Confederates. Whoever attacked usually has more casualties because they have to come out in the open. They have to maneuver. They have to attack. One of the wounded was Johnston, their commander. Riding near the front, he took a musket ball. Now, they had new musket balls that when they fired, the back end would kind of compress, kind of flatten, caught the grooves of the rifle were much more accurate, much more deadly. Frenchman who invented it was named Manet, so they call it musket ball. So Manet, it became mini balls. Get them right here, right here, right there. And there's nothing to do. In fact, even though they took these long probes, try to find the bullet and stick them in the hole, kind of just egg. The musket ball would lodge in his head for the rest of his life. He would be bedridden for nearly a year. And for the rest of his life, this wound would, using the terminology of the day, leak. Yeah, that's as bad as it sounds. That wound would eventually kill Johnson in 1880. That's how long he lived with that musket ball chain. He would come back and fight. Now, the army in front of Richmond needed a new command. And Jefferson Davis chose somebody who every one of his advisors said, he's too old, he can no longer fight, he had passed them by, pick somebody else. Do you know who he picked? Robert E. Lee. In fact, the men immediately called him Old Granny Lee, because they thought he was too old to fight. And also a little misogynistic. I think it's manly enough. And Lee also had him dig trenches, which they thought was slavery. They shouldn't be doing that. Even though the men would soon realize, you dig trenches, you might move. You're standing out in the open, you might die. But anyways, and he took command. This was really controversial. Looking back, it seems kind of funny because Lee has such an amazing reputation. Some of it deserved. He dug in, and Lee had this ability to understand his opponent. And he seemed to understand McClellan. Knew him a little bit from the old army before the war, but knew how cautious he was. And Lee organized, got reinforcements, nearly 70,000 men. McClellan reinforced over 100,000 men. He would counterattack with his new army. He dubbed it the Army of Northern Virginia. So those are the two most important armies in American history. The Union Army of the Potomac and the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia. Lee would command it for the rest of the war. Davis kept command of the whole Confederate Army for the last couple months of the war. And I like these two pictures because it shows Army of Northern Virginia forces. And unlike Union forces, most of them didn't have uniforms. They didn't have enough material. They came with whatever clothes they had. They would take the nut of what's called the butternut tree, smash it to kind of an oily dye, and that's what they would wear. So it's kind of a brownish. No one really has that. Besides that, I can see kind of a light brown. So you might see Confederates called butternuts. But if you ever hear them called, like the blue and the gray, very few actually had gray uniforms unless they had a lot of them. In fact, some of these men are wearing uniform. That's a Union too. That they dyed with butternut. He stole it from a Union force because it's full of water. And so not very well equipped. They didn't have knapsacks. They carried their gear in blankets rolled up, wrapped around their shoulder. They were poorly equipped. They didn't have much, but they counterattacked. And this would lead to a series of 7 bloody battles we call cleverly the 7 days. The end of July or June into early July. And these 7 days would change the entire course of not just the war, but American history. It changed everything. So here's Richmond, Lee's in front. The Union line is like this. And Lee attacked the Union flank at a place called Mechanicsville, the first of the 7 days, just the first day. Same deal happened. Men got lost. They misread orders. Sometimes they just didn't attack, so their commander lost their nerve. The offensive didn't go well. In fact, that first day, it was a pretty decisive Union victory. They pushed him back at every spot. And the commanders there on the spot, like General Hooker or General Kearney, wanted to counterattack. But McClellan was convinced he's outnumbered. Who were his spies, the private detectives? You remember their name? Pinkertons. They convinced him that he was still outnumbered. And McClellan thought, oh my God, here comes the counterattack that will destroy my army and therefore destroy the Union. And even though they won that first day, what did he do? Lee attacked the retreating force because that's all Lee knew what to do. He was so audacious and aggressive. Counterattack. Beat back again. But McClellan retreated again. Retreated again. In fact, here, McClellan's forces were retreating so hastily, Lee's forces almost defeated them for a total victory. But some of his generals, like Stonewall Jackson, decided to get out under retreat instead of attack. Weird things happen. The last day of the battle, you remember I told you about canister? Cannon would fire, basically imagine a can about that big, full of between 200 to 250 musket balls. So when it was fired by a cannon, it would be like a massive shotgun that would just rip bodies apart. Union forces lined up cannon on Malvern Hill. And the Confederates attacked into them and were slaughtered. Bodies piled up on top of each other. Those are Confederate forces. These are the cannon. Fired right into grave shot. And McClellan retreated again. McClellan actually almost fled. He totally lost his nerve. And by the end of the 7 days, McClellan bottled himself up on a little valley along a river called Harrison's Landing, and Lee turned the entire course of the war. Not by winning victories, but by attacking and knowing, just having this innate sense that McClellan would retreat. To give you an idea how bloody these battles were, in 7 days, over 37,000 casualties, about 21,000 were Confederates. The Confederates lost a lot of men, but turned this whole course of the war. All of a sudden, Lee's reputation became a victory after victory overnight, from old Granny Lee to old Master Lee. And McClellan got bottled up. You won't need to know the exact numbers of casualties. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how bloody this battle was. The point was, everything changed. Think about it. They went from, it looked like Richmond would fall. The Confederate Army would be defeated, a Union victory, 1862, the war might be over, to humiliating defeat overnight. Lincoln even went down to Harrison's Landing to beg McClellan to move and say, we'll send you reinforcements, move, move, move. And McClellan proceeded to lecture Lincoln on what a bad president he was, and that perhaps we need a dictator. McClellan, Lincoln didn't know what to do. McClellan commanded still hundreds of or tens of thousands of men. Could he make himself a dictator? What a situation. It's so weird to think about how scared they were of dictator. Maybe not so much anymore, but seems so weird at that moment. And then Lincoln wanted Farnham, but thought he couldn't do it. I should have. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this later. But there were a couple reversals here too that looked like on the verge of great victory in the West, it turned into perhaps defeat. Lincoln now was desperate. He did something really desperate. A small Union force captured an island on the Mississippi called very cleverly Island Number 10. And so we thought, well, if you want a victory, I'll give him command. Okay. Islands on the Mississippi River. They start counting from where the Ohio River runs in south. So the first island south of the Ohio, runs the Mississippi, is island number 1. That clever? So that's how they named the islands on the Mississippi. Why from the Ohio? That's basically the avenue where the first U.S. settlers came. So they just went down the Mississippi and started counting. So that guy's name was John Pope. And so here's a picture of John Pope. And basically took whatever forces they could find, and Lincoln ordered McClellan to give up some of his men in Harrison Landing. Eventually, they've all come back to Washington, D.C. and gave it to Pope for the Army of Virginia. One battle the Army of Virginia would fight. Pope announced he will go to Richmond and hang every traitor. Lincoln or Lee knew Pope and knew he was full of a lot of bluster, but would use his nerve. And so Lee abandoned the rest of McClellan's army, which is kind of crazy, but he showed he understood McClellan won't do anything. And counterattacked Pope, outmaneuvered him, got behind him. Pope ran into an ambush at the same battlefield as the first battle of the first major battle, for the second battle of Bull Run and or Manassas. A bloody, really confusing battle, where Pope attacked Stonewall Jackson's forces and thought he was going to win a victory. Then he was ambushed by Lee's probably best commander, James Longstreet. This is called the North, so it's trying to look like a northern victory. Union forces fought well, but were poorly led, outmaneuvered, and at the end of the day, another Confederate victory. We can't go into all the details. It's a really confusing battle. But to give you an idea, a day and a half they fought, a day and a half now. Remember, it was about 36,000 casualties at the second or 7 days. Here, 27,000 in a day and a half. Are you getting the idea how bloody these battles are becoming? And remember the Confederate plan. Kill and wound so many Northern soldiers. People back home won't want to it. But the South running out of them too. At the end of the day. So we're not going to go into the details of this battle, but think about it. We're about ready to win to 2 humiliating defeats. 7 days and second Bull Run. Now Union forces retreated in good order. They weren't. It wasn't that they were destroyed. They retreated back to Washington, D.C., but morale was in the tanks. Pope was immediately fired and sent to Minnesota. So troops, and then McClellan's army is kind of being sent back to Washington, D.C. It was a disaster. Lee is down to less than 40,000 men. He had lost over 30,000 men. Confederate forces. Combination in the battle and then disease. Half of his men didn't have shoes. They weren't their shoes. They were out of food and out of supplies. So he doesn't have that many men. And he knows Northern troops, the Northern Army is growing every day around Washington, D.C. So what does Lee do? He does the only thing he knows how to do. Lee orders an invasion of the North with his army that is less than half the size of the Union forces around Washington. Jumping right to here. Oh, sorry, Phil, we're not going to talk about him. Lee invades the North. I'll tell you really quickly. One of the best Union generals in the entire war was Phil Kearny. And he was furious at McClellan and Pope. He was a really good general. And after the last day of the battle, he rode out to find the Confederate forces. He went counter. And he rode out in the middle of the night. And as he rode back, Confederate Union scouts saw shadowy figures riding at him. They called scouts pickets at that time. And they panicked and opened fire. He tried to flee, but potentially the best Union general of the war was killed by his own men. It's one of the great what ifs in history. And this will happen to other generals too, and we'll get to that general on the Confederacy. Yeah. Union. Here's Union. And the thing about it is he probably would have taken over command of all Union forces. And who knows? Maybe ended the war 2 years earlier, saved thousands of lives. Who knows? It's one of the what ifs. Well, back here. Lee is hoping if he can win a victory on northern soil, he can force an overall victory by getting Britain the war. He's got to get through Maryland, though. Even though Maryland stayed in the Union, he wants to get to a free state. He wants to win a victory in Pennsylvania. So he's going to attack near Harper's Ferry and get up to Pennsylvania. But there's something else too. 1862 will be midterm elections. What political party is Lincoln again? Do you remember? And he hopes if Lincoln's Republican Party does poorly in these midterm elections, which they might do if he can win a victory in the North, that would be a symbol, the sign of the North losing confidence in the war and wanting to get out. Remember, they got to hold out. Hope the North gets tired of it. Doesn't matter what anyone said, wars are political. Do you have the political will to fight? The will is a population. Now, this is a crazy move because he doesn't have enough men. He's out of supplies. If he's defeated up here, he could also lose the war. But he knew nothing else. He knew it. He was so audacious. So they crossed. He actually divided his forces. He kept nearly 10,000 men at Harper's Ferry to take that. And the remaining 30,000 men he spread out to try to steal as much food as possible because they're so short of food. And so he's vulnerable, but he figures he has time. He can bring it all together in Pennsylvania. Lincoln is now desperate. Early in the summer, it looked like the war might end that summer. End of the summer, he is terrified. Enlistments have gone down. The men who volunteered that first year, their enlistment will be done the spring of 1863. He's really worried. What if they do badly in the midterm elections? So here's Lincoln. Now remember, the war is still about Union, but Lincoln has decided that might not be enough. He might have to widen the war to give it a great cause for victory. He was scared to do it in 1861. Now, this is a cartoon showing Lincoln and Jefferson Davis playing bridge, a card game. And anyone ever played bridge? A few people have played it. Yeah. He's trying to play his trump card to take his opponent's hand. And what is the trump card? His last card? Freedom, aka emancipation. He might turn this into a war for freedom. Give it a great cause. Not just union and patriotism, but union and freedom. More importantly, the union means freedom. And soon, the union means equality. To widen the cause of the war. Remember, he was no abolitionist. He despised slavery, but he was a free soiler. But this was a wartime measure. The problem is this. If he did it after a series of defeats, he looks desperate. He needs a victory. He needs a victory. Because there's many times in war where politicians will make a desperate move when the war seems nearly over. To give you an example, in March of 1865, the Confederates offered to end slavery to try to get Britain into the war. That's the definition of a desperate move when the whole world was fought for slavery. We'll see other examples down the road. Some of you might know a little bit about World War II. So, think about one of the most important battles in American history. Lee's trying to win a victory, get Britain into the war that will end the United States. just here, marching through Maryland on his way to Pennsylvania. There's about 100,000 Union soldiers here. He's going to be about 20,000 there. But the most important battle in American history, hey, actually, it's going to happen. He needs to be prepared. I should add there's a small Confederate force invading Kentucky too. It was just a small force, but it seemed like too big a nation to him at that time. Most important battle for us in American history to decide to decide what it means to be an American. Who's been? He needs a commander. I think Grant, knowing what's going to happen, Grant was actually kind of in disgrace after what happened in Tennessee at a place like Shiloh. Good, really good guess. Because that's what's going to happen a year and a half from now. He picks, right here, McClellan. He feels he has no choice. He puts McClellan back in command. The same person who fled at the 7 days. He feels he has nobody else because the men love McClellan. And they were overjoyed. Here he is arriving back, and the men are cheering. And McClellan begins to move westward, trying to find Lee's army. And in fact, they're moving into some of the same areas where Confederate forces had encamped just a few days before. So we're coming up to the most crucial battle in American history. And still to its day, the infamous claim of bloody state Maryland. The Battle of Antietam. This would change everything. There's a little village there called Sharpsburg. So the Confederates fight the Battle of Sharpsburg. But everybody today is just empty. Empty. Well, here's the deal. I put a map up, and because I need to point at stuff because it makes me feel better. Here's Washington, D.C. These forces are moving here. McClellan's following behind, right here. He's following behind, but of course it's McClellan. He's moving slow, keeping between Lee's army and Washington, D.C. Here are a couple candid shots. This is 1862, and there's a few Union forces on a campfire. Here are Confederate forces marching through Hagerstown, Maryland. So the photographer got his camera up on the roof and took them marching through. This is a really candid shot, pretty rare. You can see them with their gear around their shoulders, a little bit blurry because you snap a photograph. Really cool picture for the time. That was hard to get. Well, there's a squad of U.S. forces, think about 10 to 12 men, who are using the exact same fire ring, rock ring, set up by Confederate forces who took their dinner 2 days before. So they're cooking their delicious, I'm lying about the salt pork and hardtack. You know what salt pork is? So it's cured by salt. So you put a layer of salt in a barrel. Put kind of hunks of pork and fat, about an inch of pork and fat, and another layer of salt, pork and fat. Get that point, and let it cure. So imagine the saltiest thing you've ever eaten, then add salt. That's what it is. They call it bacon, but don't think of like, do you like bacon? It's just salt. Hardtack were really, because they were double baked crackers that could last forever, but they were hard as water. So they're cooking their delicious dinner. Somebody found something really valuable from the war. You can imagine how hard it would be to get cigars from the South during the Civil War. They're all smokers. He found 3 cigars wrapped with a piece of paper that must have been left by Confederates who'd been there 2 nights earlier. What a prize! And he picked it up, and instead of throwing the piece of paper into the fire, he opened it up, and it was a copy of Lee's entire operation, how he divided his forces. A staff member of Lee's command wrote all these orders down for a souvenir. And he thought he wouldn't lose it if he wrapped it around cigars, and he lost it. It got back to McClellan, and McClellan now had how Lee divided his forces. This is a golden opportunity to destroy Lee's army. Oh, imagine it. And all he had to do was move fast, and he could get in between Lee's divided forces and defeat. But did you get the catch? He had to move how? How did he move? He moved too slow. But one of these amazing things that happened. So there's a series of mountains right here. They call it South Mountain. It's basically a long line. The Appalachian Mountains are much older than the Rocky Mountains, so they've been eroded a lot more. So they're kind of like long lines. He had to get over a couple passes of these mountains to where Lee's forces were. And Lee, when he saw McClellan move to the flag, the quicker realized what was up to begin to pull everybody back. And at two little passes on South Mountain, a couple hundred cavalrymen held McClellan's army of 80,000 men for a day because he never pushed through at South Mountain. Never pushed through. If he would have pushed through, he would have got there a day before Lee pulled his forces together. Instead, he wasted a day and a half, allowing Lee to pull 30,000 men around Sharpsburg. So, here's Sharpsburg. Lee only has 30,000 men. 10,000 men are still at Harper's Ferry. They got about 20 miles to march, and they're going to march all day. Men are going to pass out when they march. But they're going to arrive on the 17th. McClellan, when the battle starts, will have about 80,000. The reinforcements are coming. He put his line here around Sharpsburg. There's a bunch of hills. It's kind of rugged right along the river. Not a bad line, but the problem is if he's defeated, he can't retreat because the Potomac River is. Now, why am I telling you a little bit more about this battle than other ones besides a few stories? This battle's everything. If Lee can win, it's fine end of the United States. But if Lincoln wins a victory, that's emancipation. If they win a total victory, that could be the war. This is one of those days that can decide the entire fate of our country. It literally is one of those days that can really decide what it means to be. Because what we, at least many Americans believe, what it means to be American will come about the outcome of the Civil War. So back to this. There's a big cornfield, then kind of a washed out area, then a road that kind of eroded, they call it the sunken road, and then the creek. So McClellan's plan was really good. Early in the morning, just at sunup, attack through the cornfield here. Attack so hard that if they don't break through, Lee will have to shift men over and then attack in that hole. If he has to shift men over, attack here. Eventually they'll find it open. So attack, wait an hour, attack. It's called attacking in action. Good plan. And then he kept 30,000 men in reserve with him to exploit any breakthrough. Even though he thinks he's outnumbered, he thinks McClellan also believes he's the greatest general in the world, so can win. And so the attack would be right here on the morning. Think about September through a cornfield. How high is the corn? This high. These are reenactors going through what's called Miller's Cornfield. And they would attack. And now it is simply known as the corn. And they attack through this, the best corps, or one of the best corps in his army, led by Joe Hooker, would attack through here. And they pushed all the way to Confederate forces, pushed them back towards a church of pacifists called the Dunker Church. Confederates under Stonewall Jackson would push them back. They were firing canister at each other at almost point blank range, to where every stalk of corn was cut down to just this high, about on my ankle, I'll say about that high, and raged back and forth along this. Bodies were piled up. 3 Union generals would be horribly wounded, including 2 of the best, George Meade and Joe Hooker. Back and forth at rage. It worked kind of the way they thought in the cornfield. But the next attack that was supposed to attack right here, an hour later, their commander, a guy named John Mansfield, who was 62, they got lost. There's this kind of hollow area right there, and they got lost in there. They could hear the shooting, but they couldn't get out of it. They were an hour late. And then when they finally attacked, Mansfield wanted to prove that he was still fit and able to fight at 62. So he was riding his horse. He had gray hair, kind of really long gray hair. And you can see it, the man could follow him. He's waving his sword saying, "Follow me," and what happened? He would be mortally wounded. So the attack kind of broke down. So the cornfield almost worked. They almost broke through. But the next attack that was supposed to come here was 2 hours late. So they allowed him to shift men back. Matthew Brady was a photographer in Philadelphia. He had a studio, photography studio. He heard about the battle and told his photographers to go out and be there when the battle ended. And the day after the battle, his photographers went out and took the most candid, and they would never be seen before, pictures like this of the battle. These are Union dead who fell, and that's Miller's cornfield right here. There's a couple fences they had to climb. They were dead. That's the day after the battle. That's exactly where they lived. And you can see it's unusually hot, that cemetery. So you can see the bodies bloating in the hot cemeteries. And in front of that church, a pacifist, the Confederates, the Confederates held out right there. That's Sumter Church, and those are Confederate camps, bloating in the sun. His exhibition of this, after the battle, was a sensation you can't believe. Thousands went to see this because they had never seen a hell of a war like this. It's always romantic paintings of glorious victories. Brady's going to become, he actually wasn't a photographer, but the most popular or the best known photography studio in American history. But after this battle, you can imagine what photography studios all over trying to do to reenact this. So by Gettysburg, they're posing bodies in dramatic places after they fought, because they wanted to take advantage of the money that Brady got from this. These are one of those. I'm glad they're not black and white. Well, the next battle would be along this sunken road right here. There's 2 hours late, and they attacked right here, sloping down cornfield to this sunken road, which was like a natural trench. The sunken road would take the name soon, Bloody Lane. Now, West Point still sends every freshman class at the U.S. Military Academy goes to Antietam and Gettysburg to study tactics. So see that tower on the right-hand corner? That tower is right along Bloody Lane that was constructed by West Point, the military academy. Now you go up there, so that's my picture taking, looking down at it. And even though it's kind of eroded, imagine a really good, really pretty effective trench with this split rail fence as another fortification. It's corn sloping down. They still grow corn there. Park Service still does this. And line after line of Union forces attacked till every corn was cut down to stalks. And they kept attacking, but couldn't get through Bloody Lane. Attack after attack. And I'll tell you one story when I was there. I was there, this must be 2016. No, before that. This time was 2009. I've been there for, I don't know, more battlefields. But I was there, and the temperature was the hottest I've ever been. The temperature was between 100 and 105. Okay, I've been in hotter temperatures, but the humidity was 103%. That's when it goes beyond the saturation point. It was so hot that it felt like you were in a shower the whole time. It was just, I mean, unbelievable. It was one of those that you went into the shade and actually felt hotter because it felt more steady. I've never felt anything like it. It's unreal how hot it was. But I was there. You're someplace, you have one day, you got to go. So I walked down this little path here, and I went in there and just stifling hot. And I walked down into the lane, and I was covered by little chigger bugs, little gnats. I don't mean just a few. I mean covered. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt. I couldn't see my arm anymore. It was just covered with it. There's bugs this thick and like this, and they get in my mouth, they went in my nose, my ear, just covered with them. And I ran out, and they were gone. No bugs, but as soon as you take one step in, covered. And I did. I kind of threw my leg in there and then covered my leg in it. And the next person went back. They saw me. What is wrong? I said, covered with bugs. They decided. And two people walking with a little dog. Next to them, the dog is yipping and they're jumping up and down and screaming. And so, yes, it is haunted with chigger bugs. The United States recruited tens of thousands of Irish immigrants to fight. Remember Ireland, how they came in the 1840s? And one of the leaders of Irish independence was a man named Thomas Francis Long. He would be condemned to death for trying to lead a revolution in 1848 against British rule. He's the guy who invented the Irish flag. the Irish flag, which is green, white, and orange. He invented it. He would be exiled to Australia. He would escape and get to America and convince thousands of Irish immigrants to join the Union because that would help Irish independence. He sincerely believed it. So he's this well-known freedom fighter. I mean, really well-known Irishman. And he would command the most famous unit of Irish soldiers called the Irish Brigade. And there's a picture of Thomas Francis Moore, the Irish Brigade. So when I was in Antietam, I spent the $25. But one of the flags of one of the regiments of the Irish Brigade. 69th Regiment, Irish Brigade. I had it. And they broke through the Sunken Ridge. They broke through. They finally broke through. Half of the men were killed or wounded, but they broke through. But no reinforcements came. Remember McClellan had 30,000 men? He never used them the entire day. They broke through and no reinforcements, so they were pushing. Another blown opportunity lost. So that's Marr. Marr was crushed by this. And would soon after the fact, after Fredericksburg, he couldn't do it. So many of his friends had died. Just couldn't do it. He wanted to quit. But Lincoln knew how valuable a politician he was. So offered him to become the lieutenant governor of this new territory you might have heard of, called Montana. And so Marr reluctantly took it. And as soon as he got there, the governor said, "You're the lieutenant governor? Okay, I quit." Because Montana was overrun with Confederates. Overrun with Confederates. And so Marr became the second territorial governor of Montana and would be murdered by these pro-Confederate vigilantes. I'm no fan of vigilantes. They're a bunch of pro-Confederate thugs, which is amazing. We have a parade and there's a school just to the east of us, and that is their nickname. And they were Confederates. They murdered him. Thomas Francis Marr. Irish immigrants who dominate the Democratic Party in Montana at the end of the century got that statue of Thomas Francis Marr in front of the United States Capitol. So that's that man. That statue, which all of you should know. If you don't know, don't act like you do before. That's Thomas Francis Marr. I love that statue. That's Marr. And that's the unveiling of it. That's the other side of the Irish Brigade at something like the bloody. So when I was in Dublin, Ireland, and I was taking a walking tour of the 1916 Easter Rebellion against British rule, and it went through Ireland, it went through Dublin. It was such a good tour. Guide was unreal. I was so much fun. I did walking tours were fantastic. They walking tours. My wife and I are very running by football. And saving money, so we take from ourselves. But back to this. We were there, and him and I were talking. It was just fun. And he, I was from Montana. He goes, "We're in Montana." I go, "Helen, he got to Thomas Francis Marr statue. I've been there. I love it." So we talked about that. And then the next day, of course, he said, "Butte." Oh, cool. It's Butte. Okay. But I think he's still there. If you ever get to Dublin, take the tour. Maybe we can take a bus, go to Dublin, back to a field trip, hop in the yellow school bus, get a ramp, kind of jump to Greenland. Moving on. That's Bloody Lane happening. Bodies were piled on top of each other. And look at the corn stalks of the battle. Another time I was there, there was a class from West Point. They were there. That was pretty cool. They're just, and I kind of snuck in with them because their professor was talking about the battle, so I'm like, here. And the next, it still might work. The next part was at a bridge right here. And a new Corps commander named Ambrose Burnside was pushing his nearly 15,000 men across Burnside Bridge. Well, across a bridge on the Antietam Bridge. It's now called Burnside's Bridge. He got focused on this bridge and wasted 3 hours. And we just kept out by a few hundred men from Alabama. If he would have went a quarter mile south, they could have crossed Antietam Creek without getting their knees hurt. And got behind the Confederate line and got here and turned the tide of the war. But a concerted rush Well, that's now called Burnside Bridge. This was kind of a disaster. A concerted rush got over the bridge and they broke through. And even though it's late afternoon, it still might move. It still might work. They rushed and got through. And they began to advance. These are the tree lines right here into the Confederate rear. One of the brigade commanders was a guy named Samuel Sturgis, right here. There's a town in South Dakota named after him. He would be the commander of the 7th Cavalry. The second in command was George Custer. The 7th Cavalry, even though Sturgis wasn't there, would be defeated at the Battle of Bighorn. A member of Sturgis' brigade was a guy by the name of Mark Partridge. That's my great grandfather. He would be there and Antietam. He'd be at Antietam at Gettysburg. And they broke through, but the last minute, Federal forces from Harper's Ferry arrived and counterattacked as quickly as they could, and Burnside's exhausted men just couldn't hold it. 1 hour earlier, half an hour earlier, and the war might have ended, and our entire course of history would be different. At the end of the day, no one could quite believe what happened. In just the daylight hours on the 17th of September, 1862, just daylight hours, nearly over 27,000 men were killed when the witness. One day, about 11 hours. They couldn't believe it. Most were Union, but still about 12,000 Confederate. A bloodbath. McClellan was so shaken that the next day he should have counterattacked. He had 30,000 men to have him fought. They couldn't believe what they saw. They just couldn't wrap their mind around the carnage of the number of wounded. And Lee was able to pull him. So everyone got that? Lee was able to defeat across the river. But at the end of the day, who won? Who held the battlefield? The Union. It was enough of a victory to change American history. So many chances to end the war. Didn't happen, but it led to the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slaves in areas controlled by the rebellion. Freed slaves in areas controlled by the rebellion. Lincoln could issue this as a wartime maneuver. It wouldn't take place until January 1st, 1863. So he's giving the Confederates 3 more months to see how bad or see the wrong of their ways. Now, if areas controlled by the rebellion, on January 1st, 1863, what slaves are free? Areas controlled by the rebellion, the slaves are free. Are they going to free their own slaves? It freed nobody unless what happens? The Union has got to win. But we're going to jump the gun to this. But it ended slavery. It effectively ended slavery. Once the fight came for freedom, they can't go back. And the United States is forever different. It has to be for freedom. And there's no way Britain went into the war. No way. And tens of thousands of the most determined people in the United States will now be recruited. Black soldiers will eventually make up over 10% of the United States Army and be decisive for the victory of the United States. Antietam, huge battle, changed the entire United States. But they could have ended it right then. And who knows how history be different. Of all the battlefields I've been to, Antietam is the best to go to. It's the biggest battle. It's well marked. But unlike Gettysburg or places like Shiloh or Vicksburg, it's not thousands of tourists. It's not as well known. So you're not overwhelmed with the people. I will tell you my story about me dealing with tourists and things. I think I might tell my story on Thursday about me dealing with people at Shiloh. I don't think it's great. All right, clear out. If you post your pieces, I'm trying to look at it for 9 o'clock on Teams, just type it up. I am going to collect outline brainstorming pieces. You can't use that. You have to go outside. Oh. Okay, a little bit too much problem. I've seen you did it before. I'm not gonna make it. Very good. Just wait till we get general tomorrow. Or Thursday.